The 90s were an amazing time to grow up. The music was great, the movies were great, but the best part was the cartoons. You didn't even have to have cable back then. Before school, after school, Saturday mornings, we were constantly being blasted with what is arguably the greatest era of children's animated programming ever. But you know what we didn't have too much of? Anime. Sure, there was Voltron, a few scattered shows on Nick Jr., and MTV started showing reruns of Speed Racer. But we as a collective public had yet to hear the term anime, and barely even recognize these shows as having a Japanese origin, if we did at all. However, that all changed in the fall of 1995. Sailor Moon is the first show many of us distinctly remember as being Japanese. For most people, they remember the very first time they heard these musical notes, whether it's the American version or the Japanese, and recognize as a moment that changed their lives forever. Honestly, it did for me too, but I didn't want to admit it at first. The show was a big topic of interest at my school at the time, with most of us, including me, going off on its annoying theme song, shrill and annoying voice acting, and fan service that confused our prepubescent girls have cooties minds. Meanwhile, I was watching it every goddamn morning. I guess you could say it was my first guilty pleasure. I didn't want to admit I liked it, even to myself. But there was something about it that kept bringing me back to the point where I never missed an episode. And it took me a long time to figure out what that was. Now, when looking back on the 90s, most action-oriented shows are remembered in one of two categories. One is a revered classic. The other is total cheese. Most people group Sailor Moon into the former, and it is arguably one of the most well-regarded treasures in anime history. But why? The version we here in America were exposed to was less than stellar. Its saga of poor translation, unnecessary censorship, plot alterations, and baffling changes have all been well documented. But back then, we didn't know that. By all accounts, this show should have been forgotten and buried, and for a while there, it looked like it was going to. Deke Entertainment stopped translating the show halfway through the second season. That's Sailor Moon R for you purists out there. And the series was pulled from syndication in way early 1996. It bounced all over the place for a few years, even briefly landing on the USA Action Extreme team until it finally was put where it really belonged.
Am I talking to him?
Today at 4, Tsunami's got a brand new superstar.
What?
I think I have a crush on her.
Sailor Moon really helped Toonami become the programming block that was destined to be. And it was the first time the programming block took steps to do more than just pick up abandoned syndicated cartoons and be at the cutting edge of the growing anime movement. It finished the second season. They also brought over the third and fourth seasons, but it was eventually overshadowed by the Dragon Ball Z juggernaut. It soon lost its spot on Toonami, and the fifth season to this day has not gotten an official English translation. The tough times continued as the DVD box sets released here were of significantly poor audio and visual quality. The musicals and live action series had no chance of making it to the States, and no one was picking up the show for rebroadcast. Basically, the American Sailor Moon fan base is one of the most battered and bruised fan bases out there. With having to deal with so much crap, you almost wouldn't blame them for wanting to move on to something else. But we didn't. And I think that's that fighting spirit to hold on to our fandom that made us look past the flaws that had been presented to us and hold on to the iconic nature of these mainly 5 teenage girls fighting to save the world. But for many of us, we haven't seen this series in 15 years. Does it still hold up in our adulthood? Whether you saw the American version or the Japanese, there were more than a few cringe-inducing moments, and the amount of filler episodes can be tough to get through. So why did we gravitate to this show so much? Well, because, to be honest, this show was unparalleled by any other show at the time when it took itself seriously. Once you move past the schlock and the filler, you begin to see one of the richest mythologies and some of the most well-rounded characters ever in a children's show. And this shone through despite the quality of the deep dub. For many of us, this was the first time we saw bad guys who weren't completely bad. The first time we saw a main character who wasn't the personification of perfect. But most of all, this was the first time we saw female characters being taken just as seriously as their male counterparts in other shows. They had definition, they had arcs, they had quirks, they had understandable motivations, and this is what makes them persist 20 years later. As a child, all of this was very, very new to me, and I can honestly say that all of these elements combined are the reason why I keep coming back to Sailor Moon. The show and its characters have truly withstood the test of time. Despite its missteps in bringing it to America, its true wonder and splendor still shone through and created a generation of fans that refuse to let this legend die. And true, while there are more than a few times where there are some cringeworthy moments, some would argue that that's part of the charm. As for nostalgia tainting our view of the show, I don't think so. Flawed as it may be, the Deke Dub did introduce us to this imaginative franchise and served as a gateway for us to experience the nostalgia in its many forms. Whether it's the manga, the musicals, the live-action series, or the original version of the cartoon. And that honestly for me was what solidified my fandom, was being able to experience a story as it was originally intended, with content, themes, and plots that felt much more mature by comparison than what we were initially exposed to. Sure, some of the filler episodes still bore me, but hey, giving this show a fair chance wound up being a huge inspiration on my life. Besides, it gave me a chance to hear the original version of the show's theme, Moonlight Densetsu, and change that melody from being hair-pullingly annoying to a song that I deeply love. Those drums are awesome. And honestly, the bad times that I went through may have been a blessing in disguise. Otherwise, we could have got this.
占う恋の行方へ同じく